All right, folks, today we're going to do something a little bit different. So over the last few months, last 6, 8, I don't know, maybe even longer, I've been working on what I honestly believe might be the most important project in my Silver Edge career. It's a book. So right now, the working title of the book is Fully Alive, a blueprint for the strongest, healthiest, and most meaningful second half of your life. And I'm really, really happy to tell you guys the first draft is finally finished. So now comes the hard part, right? Over the next several months, I'm going to be revising it. I'm going to be editing it. I'm going to be tightening it up, and I need to get it ready for publication. And honestly, I'd like your help. So instead of just disappearing into my office until the book is perfect, I thought, why not invite you guys behind the scenes here? So for the next several weeks, you're going to hear this book before anyone else, right? Every week, I'm going to read one chapter right here on the podcast. So some chapters may change, obviously. Some stories might get rewritten. Some ideas are going to get stronger because of the conversations that we have together. So in other words, you're not just listening to the book, but my hope is that you're going to help me write it. So here's my ask. If something resonates with you, tell me. If something's not clear, tell me. If a story reminds you of your own life, I definitely want to hear that too. You can email me at coach@silveredgefitness.com. That's coach@silveredgefitness.com. Because my goal isn't simply to publish another health book. Lord knows there's enough of those out there already. But my goal is to create the book that I wish somebody had handed me years ago. And it's the book I hope will genuinely change lives for decades to come. So I want to thank you in advance for taking this journey with me, for indulging me here. So beautiful people, whip up your protein smoothies and let's jump into chapter 1 of Fully Alive. Congratulations, you've just found the #1 over 50 health and wellness podcast on the planet. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert and the founder of the Silver Edge, and I am on a mission to help men and women over 50 build the health, the strength, the confidence to make the second half of life the best half. All right, folks, let's do this. Here we go. Part 1, the diet trap. Chapter 1, why you've been regaining the same 20 pounds for 20 years. Let me start with a question. How many times have you lost the same 10, 20, or 30 pounds? Seriously, take a moment and think about it. Not how many pounds you've lost over your lifetime. How many times you've lost the same pounds. Maybe it was Weight Watchers. Maybe it was keto. Maybe it was intermittent fasting. Maybe it was one of those meal replacement programs where you spend a small fortune eating food that tastes like it was packaged during the Reagan administration. Maybe it was simply gritting your teeth, eating salads, and spending extra time on the treadmill. Whatever the method, the story usually goes something like this. You decide enough is enough. You clean out the pantry. You start a new plan. You become incredibly motivated. For a few weeks, or maybe even a few months, you do great. The scale moves. Your clothes fit better. People start noticing. You feel hopeful again. And then life happens. A vacation, a holiday, a stressful season at work, an injury, a family crisis, or maybe nothing dramatic happens at all. Maybe you simply get tired of feeling hungry all the time. Slowly, insidiously, old habits begin creeping back in. A few pounds return, then a few more. Before long, all the weight is back, sometimes with interest. A year later, you're standing in front of the mirror making a familiar promise. This time will be different. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something. You're not alone. In fact, after coaching hundreds of men and women over 50, I've come to realize that this story is far more common than most people think. I've heard some version of it thousands of times. People tell me, I used to be able to lose weight so easily. I know what to do, I just can't seem to stick with it. I think my metabolism is broken. Maybe this is just what happens after 50. Or my personal favorite, Kevin, I've lost these same 20 pounds at least 5 times. The first time I heard that, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so incredibly accurate. Many people aren't trying to lose 20 pounds. They're trying to lose the same 20 pounds they've been losing and regaining for years, sometimes decades. And every failed attempt leaves behind a little more frustration, a little more confusion, a little less confidence. Eventually, people begin drawing a conclusion that seems perfectly logical. There must be something wrong with me. Maybe you've thought that yourself. Maybe you've blamed your age, your hormones, your genetics, your sweet tooth, your lack of motivation, your lack of discipline. Maybe you've convinced yourself that if you could just find the right diet, the right supplement, the right workout, or the right prescription medicine, everything would finally click into place. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is the system you've been following? What if the reason you've struggled isn't because you failed? What if it's because you've been taught a strategy that was never designed to work long-term in the first place? That may sound hard to believe. After all, we've all been told the same thing for decades. Eat less, move more, lose weight. Simple, right? If it were really that simple, though, why are so many intelligent, hardworking people still struggling? Why are millions of men and women doing their best to eat less and exercise more while simultaneously becoming heavier, weaker, more frustrated, and more discouraged? Why do so many people lose weight only to gain it all back? These questions matter because the answers will change everything. The truth is that most people don't have a weight loss problem. They have a weight regain problem. Losing weight is relatively common. Keeping it off is where things get difficult. And the reason has nothing to do with your character, your willpower, or your worth as a person. The real problem is something I call the diet trap. And if you're over 50, there's a very good chance you've been stuck in it for years, maybe even decades, without even realizing it. In this chapter, we're going to expose exactly how the diet trap works, why it keeps so many people stuck in the same frustrating cycle, and why escaping it may be the single most important step you take toward building the lean, strong, healthy body you want for the second half of life. The frustration cycle. Most people think their problem is that they can't lose weight. It's not. Most people can lose weight. The problem is that they can't keep it off. In fact, if you're reading this book, there's a pretty good chance you've already proven you know how to lose weight. You've probably done it multiple times. Think about that for a moment. If you've lost 20 pounds 3 separate times, then you've actually lost 60 pounds. The problem isn't your ability to lose weight. The problem is that the weight keeps finding its way back home. And when it does, it rarely travels alone. It usually brings a few extra pounds with it. That's why so many men and women find themselves stuck in the frustration cycle. The cycle usually begins with a moment of discomfort. Maybe your pants don't fit anymore. Maybe you catch an unflattering glimpse of yourself in the mirror. Maybe your doctor gives you a stern lecture about your blood pressure, cholesterol, or blood sugar. Maybe you step on the scale and discover a number you never imagined you'd see. Whatever the trigger, the emotional response is usually the same: panic. You immediately decide it's time to, quote unquote, get serious. And because you've been told your entire life that weight loss is simply a matter of eating less and exercising more, that's exactly what you do. You slash calories, you cut out entire food groups, you swear off bread, you swear off dessert, you swear off alcohol. You start spending more time on the treadmill. You start tracking every calorie. You become laser focused. And for a while, it works. Of course it works. The scale goes down. You feel encouraged. Friends start noticing. Your motivation skyrockets. You tell yourself, this is it. I finally figured it out. But then something interesting happens. The longer you stay on the plan, the harder it becomes. The hunger increases. The cravings increase. The excitement fades. The effort required to maintain the plan becomes exhausting. At first, you white-knuckle your way through it. Then you begin making little exceptions. One meal, one dessert, one skipped workout, one weekend off, nothing dramatic, just small deviations from the plan. Soon, those small deviations become larger ones. The treadmill sessions become less frequent. The strict food rules become harder to follow. Life gets busy. Stress increases. Motivation fades. Before long, you're no longer following the plan at all. And because the plan was never designed for real life in the first place, the weight begins to return. At first, it's only a few pounds, then a few more. Eventually, you're right back where you started, sometimes heavier. Now comes the most damaging part of the entire cycle. The self-talk. You blame yourself. You tell yourself you lack discipline. You tell yourself you should have tried harder. You tell yourself you should have been stronger. Meanwhile, the fitness industry is standing by with another solution. A new diet, a new supplement, a new workout, a new miracle, a new promise. And because you're frustrated, embarrassed, and eager for change, you give it another shot. The cycle begins again. Lose, regain, blame yourself, start over. Lose, regain, blame yourself, start over. Year after year, decade after decade. By the time many people reach their 50s or 60s, they aren't just carrying extra body fat, they're carrying years of disappointment, years of broken promises to themselves, years of wondering why everybody else seems to have this figured out. The truth is, they haven't. Most people are stuck in the exact same cycle. The difference is that some are still pretending it works. Here's what I want you to understand. If you've been trapped in this cycle, it does not mean you're lazy. It does not mean you're weak. It does not mean you're broken. It means you've been trying to solve a long-term problem with a short-term solution. And that's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. Sooner or later, the cracks begin to show. The frustration cycle is exhausting. It's discouraging. It's expensive. But perhaps most importantly, it steals something far more valuable than money. It steals hope. Because after enough failed attempts, people stop believing change is possible. They begin settling. They tell themselves, maybe this is just what happens when you get older. Maybe my metabolism is broken. Maybe my genetics are working against me. Maybe I should just accept it. That belief is exactly what I want to challenge in this book. Because the problem isn't that you're incapable of change. The problem is that you've been trapped in a cycle that was never going to take you where you wanted to go. Before we talk about how to escape the cycle, however, we need to understand why this happens in the first place. And that brings us to one of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to lose weight after 50. They start eating like rabbits. Why people keep struggling? One of the most frustrating things about weight loss is that the people who struggle the most are often the people who care the most. Think about the people you know who have repeatedly tried to lose weight. Are they lazy? Probably not. Are they stupid? Definitely not. Many are highly successful in other areas of life. They've built careers, they've raised families, managed business, paid off mortgages, overcome challenges, solved complicated problems. These are not people who lack intelligence, work ethic, or determination. And yet, when it comes to their weight, many feel like failures. Why? Because they've been led to believe that body fat is simply a math problem. Calories in, calories out. Eat less, move more. If you're not losing weight, you must not be trying hard enough. That message has been repeated so often that most people accept it as fact. And when it doesn't work, they naturally assume the problem must be them. Imagine applying that logic to any other area of life. Imagine your financial advisor told you, becoming wealthy is simple. Just spend less money. Technically true, but also wildly incomplete. You could spend less money and still make terrible financial decisions. You could spend less money and never build wealth. You could spend less money and still end up struggling financially. The advice isn't necessarily wrong, it's just far too simplistic to solve a complex problem. Weight loss advice often suffers the same issue. Eat less, move more. Sure, that might create short-term weight loss, but it doesn't explain why so many people regain the weight. It doesn't explain why maintaining the weight loss feels harder and harder with age. It doesn't explain why people who have been dieting for decades often feel like their bodies are fighting against them. Most importantly, it doesn't explain why so many intelligent, disciplined people continue struggling despite doing exactly what they've been told to do. The truth is that many people are actually following the instructions remarkably well. They're eating salads, they're skipping desserts, they're avoiding carbs, they're spending hours doing cardio, they're counting points, calories, macros, or fasting windows. They're working incredibly hard. The problem is that hard work cannot compensate for a flawed strategy. Let me give you an example. Imagine you wanted to drive from North Carolina to California. You load up the car, fill the gas tank, pack snacks for the trip, and then start driving north. You can drive 20 hours a day. You can be incredibly disciplined. You can be the hardest working driver on the road. But if you're headed in the wrong direction, more effort won't get you where you want to go. It will simply take you farther away from your destination. This is exactly what happens to many chronic dieters. The issue isn't effort. The issue is direction. They're doing more and more of the very things that are keeping them stuck. When clients first come to me, many are convinced they need more discipline, more willpower, more motivation, more accountability. But after a few conversations, a different picture usually emerges. These people don't have a motivation problem. Most have been motivated dozens of times. They've started countless diets, bought gym memberships, downloaded apps, ordered supplements, read books, listened to podcasts. They've proven they can get motivated. What they haven't been given is a sustainable roadmap. That's a very different problem. Motivation is powerful, but motivation is temporary. Nobody stays motivated forever. Not me, not you, not the world's most successful athletes. The goal is not to become more motivated. The goal is to build a lifestyle that continues working even when motivation disappears. Because trust me, it will. Some days you'll feel like exercising. Some days you won't. Some days you'll feel like eating chicken and vegetables. Some days you'll want pizza. That's called being human. The people who successfully maintain a lean, healthy body for decades are not people with endless motivation. They're people with systems. They have habits, routines, structures, an environment that supports success. In other words, they don't rely on feeling like it. And here's the good news. If your problem isn't a lack of motivation, then you're much closer to success than you think. Because motivation isn't something you can control. Systems are, habits are, daily behaviors are. Those can be built. But before we discuss how to build those systems, we need to expose one of the most damaging beliefs in modern weight loss culture, the belief that eating less is always the answer. Because that seemingly harmless advice has trapped millions of people in a cycle of frustration, hunger, and failure. And nowhere is that more obvious than the diet trap. The diet trap. By now you may be starting to recognize a pattern. You gain a little weight, you panic, you start a diet, you lose weight, you regain weight, you blame yourself, you start over. Sound familiar? If so, welcome to the diet trap. The diet trap is one of the most common and most destructive cycles in modern health and fitness. The reason it's so destructive is because it feels like progress. Every time you start a new diet, it feels like you're taking action. You feel hopeful, focused, motivated, in control. You buy new groceries, you clean out the pantry, you make promises to yourself. This time will be different. And for a while, it often is. The scale goes down, people notice, you feel encouraged, the diet appears to be working. But here's the problem. Most diets are designed to help you lose weight. They are not designed to help you maintain that weight loss for the next 10, 20, or 30 years. Those are two completely different challenges. Imagine hiring a contractor to build a beautiful house. The house looks amazing from the street. Fresh paint, beautiful landscaping, brand new roof. Everything looks perfect. Then 6 months later, the foundation starts cracking. A year later, the doors won't close properly. 2 years later, major structural problems begin showing up. The problem wasn't the paint. The problem was the foundation. Most diets are built the same way. They focus on producing a quick result. They rarely address what happens next. And what happens next is where most people get into trouble. Because after the initial excitement wears off, reality shows up. Real life shows up. Vacations, birthdays, date nights, holidays, grandkids, travel, work stress, family obligations, the very things that make life worth living. And suddenly the diet becomes harder and harder to maintain. Not because you're weak, because you're human. The diet trap works because it asks people to do things they were never going to do forever. Think about some of the diets you've tried. Did you honestly plan to avoid bread for the rest of your life? Never eat dessert again? Track every calorie until your 85th birthday? Drink meal replacement shakes forever? Of course not. Many people know deep down that these approaches are temporary. The problem is that they hope they'll somehow become permanent later. But permanent results cannot be built on temporary behaviors. Read that sentence again. Permanent results cannot be built on temporary behaviors. That may be one of the most important lessons in this chapter. If a strategy requires you to suffer your way through life, eventually you'll stop doing it. Not because you failed, because the strategy failed. Now, let's make the diet trap even more dangerous. Imagine you repeat this cycle over and over for 20 years. Diet, lose weight, regain weight, diet, lose weight, regain weight, again and again and again. Every cycle leaves you a little more frustrated, a little more skeptical, a little less hopeful. Eventually, you stop believing in yourself. You begin thinking, maybe I just don't have the discipline. Maybe my metabolism is broken. Maybe this is just what happens over 50. And here's the cruel irony. The harder you try to diet your way out of the problem, the deeper you often sink into it. That's why so many people arrive at my doorstep feeling defeated. They've been working harder than ever, eating less than ever, exercising more than ever, and somehow they feel farther away from their goal than when they started. That doesn't make sense. And if you've experienced it, you know exactly how discouraging it can be. But here's the good news. The moment you recognize the diet trap, you gain the ability to escape it. You no longer have to keep replaying the same story. You no longer have to spend every January promising yourself that this year will finally be different. You no longer have to lose the same 20 pounds over and over again. Because the solution isn't finding a better diet. The solution is stepping out of the dieting mindset altogether. That's where everything begins to change. But before we can talk about what to do instead, we need to confront one of the biggest lies in modern weight loss culture, the idea that eating less is always the answer, because that belief has probably done more damage to the health, metabolism, and confidence of people over 50 than anything else. Why it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. At this point, I want to make something crystal clear. If you spent years struggling with your weight, it's not because you're lazy, it's not because you're weak, it's not because you lack character, and it's not because you're somehow broken. You've been operating in a culture that has spent decades and billions of dollars promoting quick fixes, miracle solutions, and oversimplified advice. You've been told to eat less, exercise more, try harder, have more discipline. And when those strategies didn't produce lasting results, the blame was quietly shifted back onto you. The message was clear. If the diet didn't work, you must not have worked hard enough. That's nonsense. I've met far too many intelligent, hardworking, successful people to believe that. I've coached business owners, teachers, nurses, engineers, retired military personnel, grandparents raising grandchildren, people who have succeeded in incredibly demanding areas of life. Those are not people who lack discipline. Many have simply spent years applying discipline to the wrong strategy. There's a big difference. If someone handed you a map with the wrong directions and you ended up in the wrong city, whose fault is that? The bad news is that you ended up in the wrong place. The good news is that you're not stupid. You were following the map, and that's exactly what happens to many people struggling with their weight. They followed the directions they were given. They did what the experts said. They followed the diet. They counted the points. They bought the shakes. They did the cardio. They followed the rules. The problem wasn't effort. The problem was the map. Now, here's where things get interesting. Just because something isn't your fault doesn't mean it isn't your responsibility. Let's say a storm blows a giant tree across your driveway. You didn't cause the storm. You didn't plant the tree. You didn't ask for it to happen. None of it is your fault. But if you want to get your car out of the driveway tomorrow morning, guess whose responsibility it is to deal with the tree? Yours. Life is full of situations that aren't our fault, but are still our responsibility. Health works the same way. Maybe you've inherited poor genetics. Maybe you grew up with unhealthy habits. Maybe you spent decades following bad advice. Maybe nobody ever taught you a better way. None of that is your fault. But from this moment forward, it becomes your responsibility. And I don't mean that as criticism. I mean that as good news, because responsibility gives you power. Blame takes power away. Responsibility gives it back. When people believe their weight struggles are caused entirely by age, genetics, hormones, bad luck, or some mysterious metabolic curse, they become powerless. After all, how do you fight something you can't control? But the moment you realize there are things you can control, everything changes. You can control what you eat. You can control whether you strength train. You can control how much you move each day. You can control your sleep habits. You can control the environment you create around yourself. You can control the systems and routines you build. No, you can't control everything, but you don't need to control everything. You only need to control enough things consistently enough to change the trajectory of your future. And that's exactly what this book is about. Not perfection, not punishment, not restriction, not becoming some fitness fanatic who spends 6 hours a day in the gym carrying a gallon jug of water. This book is about taking ownership of the things that matter most and letting go of the things that don't. It's about replacing frustration with clarity, replacing confusion with confidence, replacing dieting with building. Most importantly, it's about helping you understand that your future is not predetermined. The story isn't over. You are not doomed to repeat the same cycle forever. You are not sentenced to a future of increasing medication, declining energy, expanding waistlines, and shrinking possibilities. There is another path. But before we can talk about where that path leads, we need to address one final question. If diets don't work long term, if eating less isn't the answer, if the goal isn't simply to lose weight, what should the goal be? And here's where everything begins to change, because the goal isn't to lose weight. The goal is to build a body. A new possibility. What if you've been chasing the wrong goal all along? I know that may sound like a strange question. After all, if you're carrying extra weight, losing weight seems like the obvious objective. That's certainly what most people believe. For years, maybe decades, you've probably told yourself some version of the same story. If I could just lose 20 pounds, everything would be better. I'd have more confidence, more energy, better health. I'd feel comfortable in my own skin again. And on the surface, that seems perfectly reasonable. The problem is that focusing exclusively on weight loss often causes people to pursue the very strategies that keep them trapped. Because when weight loss becomes the goal, people start looking for the fastest path to the scale moving downward. Eat less, exercise more, lose weight as quickly as possible. Mission accomplished, at least temporarily. But here's a question almost nobody asks. What happens next? What happens after the weight comes off? What happens after the diet ends? What happens after the motivation fades? What happens when real life shows up? In other words, what's the diet exit strategy? Those questions matter because the true measure of success isn't whether you can lose weight. It's whether you can keep the weight off while still enjoying your life. And that's where I want to introduce you to a completely different way of thinking. What if your goal wasn't weight loss? What if your goal was building a body? A lean body, a strong body, a capable body, a body that supports the life you want to live, a body that allows you to hike with your spouse, play with your grandkids, travel without limitations, remain independent as you age, wake up energized, move with confidence, and fully participate in the second half of your life. Now we're talking about something much bigger than the number on a scale. We're talking about building a future. Because here's something I've learned after years of coaching men and women over 50. The people who achieve lasting success are rarely obsessed with weight loss. Instead, they become focused on who they are becoming. They stop asking, how quickly can I lose 10 pounds? And start asking, how strong can I become? How healthy can I become? How much energy can I create? How capable can I be 10 years from now? Those are very different questions, and they lead to very different decisions. When your goal is simply losing weight, skipping meals can seem like a great idea. When your goal is building a lean, strong, healthy body, skipping meals suddenly looks a lot less appealing. When your goal is losing weight, hours of exhausting cardio can seem like the answer. When your goal is building a strong, capable body, strength training becomes far more important. When your goal is losing weight, food feels like the enemy. When your goal is building a body, food becomes fuel. Do you see how everything starts to change? The behaviors start to change because the goal changes. The goal changes because your identity changes. You stop thinking like a dieter, you start thinking like a builder. And builders make different decisions. Builders play the long game. Builders focus on foundations. Builders create things designed to last. That's exactly what we're going to do through the rest of this book. We're going to stop chasing temporary results. We're going to start building something durable, something sustainable, something that gets stronger with time rather than weaker. And here's the best part. You don't need perfect genetics. You don't need extraordinary willpower. You don't need to become a fitness fanatic. You don't need to spend hours in the gym. You don't need to survive on salad and rice cakes. You simply need a better blueprint. That's what this book is going to give you. Over the coming chapters, you'll learn why traditional dieting fails, what actually drives health and body composition after 50, and how to build a lean, strong, energetic body you can maintain for the rest of your life. Not for 12 weeks, not for a summer, not until your next vacation, for life. Because your goal is no longer to lose weight. Your goal is to build a body. And once you understand that distinction, everything changes. The journey starts by examining one of the most damaging pieces of advice in modern nutrition, the idea that eating less is always better. It's time to talk about rabbit food. Okay, folks, that's chapter 1. So first of all, thank you so much for coming behind the scenes with me on this project. I can't tell you how much it means for you guys to be here with me on this journey. So now I need a favor. This book is not finished yet. It's in the revision process, as I said in the intro, and I genuinely want your feedback. Was there an idea here that really resonated with you? Was there a section that left you wanting more? Was something confusing? Did a story remind you of your own experience? I'd love to hear it. Just shoot me an email at coach@silveredgefitness.com. That's coach@silveredgefitness.com. I'll also throw that into the show notes. You guys can find that on whatever app you're listening to this on. But I personally read every single email that you guys send to that mailbox, and your feedback may very well shape the final version of this book before it ever goes to print. And if you know someone who spent years losing and regaining the same 10, 20, or 30 pounds, would you do me a favor and share this episode with them? It might just be the perspective shift that they've been needing. Okay, folks, until next week, stay strong.